pre-intro to the intro for this video. To make this easier to follow, and so you understand what I'm rambling on about, you should probably go to Google and type in either compressor map reading for dummies, or go to this website here, which will come up in Google when you type that in. It's hondaswap.com/forced-induction/compressor-map-reading-dummies. But just Google searching compressor map reading for dummies and then going to the Honda Swap one when it comes up will be my tutorial that I wrote back in 2008. I'm going to be using this tutorial and some of the tools on it to teach you some stuff about turbos here. One of the things is you will be able to download the image at the bottom to use, to follow along with, and also there is a CFM calculations calculator there in blue that you'll have to click on to use. This tutorial I did post on the internet back in 2008, it says there, and a couple other websites have it up, but for some reason this is the only website that still has all working images, and the CFM calculator link all works and the image link all still works. Over the years, the other ones have kind of broken. So before we get to the regular intro, this is what you're going to want to be ready for. Okay. So before we can go ahead and teach you how to pick out the turbo of your choice, that's best for your application, first of all, we got to make sure you understand how an engine basically works and then what the turbo does to help. So I'm going to cover that real quick and then we'll move on. Basically, your engine's an air pump. Of course, rotaries are the exception, but we're going to talk about a piston engine for now. Alright, so as the piston draws down in the cylinder, it draws air in. Fuel is added to it. It rises back up and compresses the air in the fuel, and the spark plug lights it off. It explodes, pushing the piston down. All the cylinders do this in the pattern that they're supposed to, and making the engine spin, and that's how the engine runs. Obviously, the bigger the explosion, as the pistons push down, the more power the engine can produce, or torque. So an engine can only draw in so much air on its own, and if you would just try to keep adding fuel to it, you would just be rich and will make less horsepower and end up ultimately too much fuel, ruining your rings, washing your cylinder walls down. And vice versa, if you somehow figured out a way to add air without fuel, you would run lean, generate a lot of heat, and melt parts, break parts. So you need to keep the air-fuel ratio proper. Now this is the job of your tuner to determine what air-fuel ratio they want. But moral of the story is there is a specific range of air-fuel ratio that's ideal. So you can't just add air without fuel or fuel without air and have it work. The way a turbocharger works is it compresses the air and forces it into the engine, allowing the engine to actually ingest more air than it would have on its own, which allows you in turn to add more fuel, so that when the piston comes up and compresses, there is more air and fuel in there than there would have been without the turbo, making a bigger explosion and making more power. So very simple. We all know basically how this works. But what we don't really understand often is how do we determine the right turbo for us. Here we have a Turbonetics based 72mm turbo that I used to run on my old Datsun, and I'm going to use this as the example. One thing that a lot of people tend to do that they should not do is they try to set a goal in their mind of a PSI rating that they want to run without truly knowing what the particular turbo they're getting their hands on is capable of at that PSI. What I mean by this is, if you're not too familiar with a given turbo and you just claim I want to run this random PSI, you're not sure how much power that's going to actually be. So, for example, we have this turbo here, and if we had a hypothetical turbo sitting here next to it, let's say a big 16G, a Mitsubishi turbo, and we could magically bolt both of these on the same engine and set them both to the same PSI. This turbo would have the potential at that same PSI to make far, far, far more horsepower. It would be making so much more CFM blowing out of here than this little 16 or the big 16G would in comparison. So that's why it's dangerous to always go to somebody, to a tuner, to your friends, and say, I'm going to buy this turbo and run X amount of PSI, because unless you're very familiar with that turbo, or plot it out like I'll show you how to later, you're not even quite sure how much power is going to be made at that PSI. So in the future, it's better to not set your heart on a given PSI so much if you're unfamiliar with the turbo, as it is a horsepower goal, and then search for a turbo that can meet that horsepower goal based on its CFM or pounds per minute that it flows. And this will all be taught here in a little bit, how you can determine that. First, I want to go over the workings of a turbo with you. This is the exhaust side. This is the side that I tend to start with when I'm picking out a turbo. Reason being is because just like when you pick out a header or a free-flowing exhaust, 3-inch, 3.5-inch, 4-inch exhaust, whatever you do, you're doing that because you want free-flowing exhaust. It's well known that the faster the exhaust can get out, the better. Well, if this is too small and restrictive, this is where your exhaust passes through first. This is going to be the cork or the bottleneck in your system. So you got to be careful that you don't go with too small of an AR housing here. Now, AR is a ratio that's basically, in real simple layman's terms, the space inside of here. Now, I can show you real quickly here exactly where you can read up on this and get a lot more information about it. But turbobygarrett.com has some tutorials on their site, and there is some information on here where it actually shows you exactly how AR is calculated and what AR is and how that works. But basically, the bigger the number on the AR, the more space that's inside here. In other words, if this is a .90 AR, there will be way more space in here than if it was a .60 AR. Now, why don't we all just go with the big AR and have it free flowing? Well, simple. It's about velocity and how much exhaust your engine actually can push out. Let's say, for example, you take a little 4-cylinder 1.8 liter and a 350 small block Chevy. Obviously, the small block Chevy's V8 is going to be pushing out way more exhaust through one of these than the 4-cylinder would. So you got to make sure that you match this with the amount of exhaust that you are going to be flowing because of velocity. And the way I could easily describe this to you is if you take a small 6-inch piece of McDonald's straw and a small 6-inch piece of garden hose, and you blow through the McDonald's straw with a given amount of pressure in your mouth and blow it against your hand, that air is going to feel like it's coming out of there at a certain velocity. If you take the garden hose and blow the exact same amount, it's going to feel like less. And obviously, the more velocity, the faster this wheel gets spun, the faster the turbo can spool up, and the faster the turbo will respond. So the trick is to make sure you go with an AR that's not a bottleneck, that's not a restriction, but yet that will not be too large so the turbo is not laggy. Also, the wheel itself is a factor, and these are usually rated in trim. And just like anything else, you have to be careful with going too small on the wheel, because you could have all the AR housing the size you want, but if the wheel's restrictive, there's a bug in there. Look at him. If the wheel's too restrictive and the air can't get through it fast enough, then you're also just going to be causing a restriction in your system. So all this has to be taken into consideration. Speaking of wheel trims, I want to touch note on that real quick. Most people don't even understand what the word trim truly comes from, and it's actually just a simple formula, again by Turbo by Garrett. You can go to their site and you can see here that there's a formula for determining trim. Let me focus here. turbobygarrett.com. You just go in there and Google it. The wheel is usually wider at the inner part and narrower at the outer part. And on the compressor side, that would be called the exducer in here at the wider part, and inducer at the narrow part, and vice versa on the exhaust wheel. But basically, you do this formula then, and then the formula gives you the trim. As you can see, this would be a 56 trim. So cheap companies like Chinese and whatnot, they simply go and take a measurement of the biggest spot on the wheel, and they don't bother doing the formula, and they sell it like that. So their trims are usually not anywhere near close or correct. A 56 trim Chinese turbo is usually actually somewhere only in the 40s when done by the proper formula. But anyway, that's something that you can follow and look up on there too and read. I won't preach to the choir too much on that. It's the same on the compressor side. Compressor side, you have an AR ratio for this. Obviously, the wheel size is very important because too small of a wheel just simply can't pull in enough air to generate enough CFM to meet your goal that you may have, and too large of a wheel might not be able to produce the velocity at lower RPMs and make the turbo feel less responsive and laggy down low. So how do you determine, what's the easiest way to determine what turbo would be right for you? Well, it's called the compressor map. And that's what this video is going to teach you how to do. It's going to teach you how to take a compressor map for a turbo and plot it out and map it and determine how fast the turbo has the potential to spool with your given setup and what the horsepower potential is for your given setup. So we're going to move to that next, and I'm going to switch the camera over here to the next part of the video, and we'll get moving with that. Okay guys, hopefully this is back up and working here. I've never really used one of these screen programs before. Here's our compressor map. And I'm going to basically show you how I used this compressor map back when I built my single cam Honda CRX and determined that this turbo was going to work for me. So, lesson 1, we got to determine how much flywheel horsepower a turbo can support. This will be at the flywheel for the most part. A few facts that we should take note of are a turbo's flow. It's usually measured in CFM or pounds per minute. These are numbers that you can see across the bottom of the compressor map. And let me scroll this down so you can see it. Right here at the very bottom, you'll see CFM. Okay? It takes approximately 1 pound per minute to support 10 flywheel horsepower. If your goal would be 300 flywheel horsepower, you would divide 300 by 10 to find out how many pounds per minute you would need. So 300 divided by 10 is 30, so we know that we need a turbo capable of flowing 30 pounds per minute to support 30 crank horsepower. If the map you have doesn't show the flow in pounds per minute, but rather in CFM, you can simply divide the CFM by 14.27 to convert it. Okay, so we look at the map for the Big 16G, and we notice it can flow up to 550 CFM, or roughly 38.5 pounds per minute. Remember I said that each pounds per minute can support 10 horsepower? So if we take 38.5 and we multiply it by 10, we'll get 385. So we now know that this turbo is capable of flowing enough air to support 385 horsepower at the flywheel. One last thing that we should take note of while we're looking at the turbo's flow is the efficiency at any given point. If you look at the map, you can see what are called loops or islands. And these on this map are labeled 71, 70, 68, 65, and 60, working from the center out. This is the turbo's efficiency rating. The lower the rating, the more heat the turbo pumps out. Typically 70 up is great. So you want to always try to stay in the 70% and up area. Anything lower than that is horrible. We'll touch more on this later. Let's go to lesson 2. Lesson 2 is we're going to determine how well the turbo will spool. We can use this map to get a general idea on how quickly a turbo is capable of spooling up to a certain boost level. In this case, we're going to use 20 psi. Just as a starting point. First of all, to see if the turbo is capable of flowing up that much, and secondly, because that happens to be what, from previous experience, I already knew would take just about to make the horsepower goal I had in mind. This is kind of working backwards for some of you, but just bear with me. You could have picked 15 psi as your starting point, just some number, just to see how quickly the turbo would take to spool there. So if we look along the left side of the compressor map over here, we're going to see the pressure ratio. To determine where 20 psi would factor in that scale, we need to use the following formula. You're going to take 14.7 plus the boost that you want to run, then divide by 14.7. And that will give us the pressure ratio. So in other words, 14.7 plus 20, and we're going to get 34.7. We're then going to divide that by 14.7, and we're going to get 2.36. So on this particular map, our pressure ratio for 20 psi is going to be 2.36. So we're basically going to find 2.36 on here, which, since it skips from 2.2 to 2.4, 2.3 would be just in the middle. So 2.36 would end up being right around here. And I'm going to put a line there, just straight across like that. Straight as I can. Done. Okay, so this is where roughly 20 psi will fall in line on this map. Okay? Now, this is where our goal of 20 psi will lie on this map. Next, we're going to want to see how quickly the turbo could potentially spool to 20 psi. For this, we're going to use a calculator to determine CFM at any given RPM ratio. There's a calculator online I used for this called CFM Calculations. It's on the websites I told you guys to go to. They're going to want to know engine size, volumetric efficiency, maximum boost we want to hit, maximum engine RPM, and these will all vary by your application. In my particular case, I knew that my D16 Z6 did not like to rev past 7,400 RPM. I knew that I wanted to hit 20 pounds of boost, and a good healthy VE or volumetric efficiency number for a healthy motor is around 90. So I put in 1.6, 90, 20, and 7,400, and that'll spit out the CFM. These values will always vary for your different engine setups and everything, so make sure you use yours on the calculator to determine this. And like I said, the CFM calculator can be found on the tutorial I'm reading on those websites. Anyway, we look at the map where the red line first meets up with the compressor map lines. You see that it's just about at the 210 CFM mark. So this is right here. You can see that that's just meeting up just a little bit after the 200 CFM mark. So let's draw a line down from there to around 210 CFM. So let me switch this color here to blue. Oh, I want to keep that one red. I want to do another color. What did I do? Alright, so put the red line back. Like this. Okay. And, oh, I changed the color again, guys. Bear with me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to use paint so well. Very sorry. I want to do red. And I want to do the line tool. And we were doing 2.36, which is right around here. Okay, perhaps I have to save this or something. So, let's see. Save is Control+S. Okay, now I can switch to blue. Yep. And I want to draw a line down from right where the red meets the map. And you're going to see that comes right in here around the 210 CFM ballpark. Okay? So now we need to go back to the calculator and find the 20 psi value along the left side. And we're going to follow that column. Obviously we don't have the calculator up here for you guys to see, so I'm hoping that you're following this. And we're going to see that 210 CFM is right around 3,500 RPM. So now we know that this turbo has the potential to reach 20 psi as early as 3,500 RPM based on our motor specs. That's a pretty fast spooling turbo. That has a lot to do with, like I said, the AR and the smallness of the exhaust side and the overall smallness of the turbo itself. Again, if you're not following what I'm doing here, there's a calculator that you should be using to determine some of these that's running in the background. I've already done it before, so I don't have to redo it, but you can find the calculator on the website. Lesson 3. This is a continuation of Lesson 1. Now we need to determine, we determined in Lesson 1 that this turbo can support 385 flywheel horsepower. But now we want to see what its actual potential is on our motor. The calculator we used above could be used here again, but it only takes RPM values in an increment of 500. And since our maximum RPM in this tutorial is 7,400, we'll do it by hand. Use the following formula to determine this. It's engine size in liters times max RPM times VE times PR, or pressure ratio. And then divide by 5660. So it's going to be 1.6 times 7,400. This is, again, is for my single cam 1.6 liter I had built. It would be 1.6 times 7,400 times 90 times 2.36, which is the pressure ratio that we figured earlier right here. Okay, 2.36. And it's going to equal a large number. It's 2514816. Then we divide that by 5660, and that's going to equal 444. So we know now that our particular setup is capable of 444 CFM. So let's see where that fits in on this compressor map. We'll do this one here in yellow. Let me go ahead and click save here. Control S. Learned from earlier here, right there. And now we're going to go to yellow, and we're going to find 444 CFM. It's going to be just before halfway, because obviously halfway would be 450. So we'll go back just a little bit before halfway, and we'll go straight up, like that. Okay. So, click Control S, saved. Alright. Now we have mapped this turbo for our setup. Let's see what this can tell us. First off, we've already learned by the blue line that it's a pretty fast spooling turbo for our motor. But what else can we learn? Well, by looking where the red and yellow intersect, we can see that the point on the island is rated at a 68% efficiency. So right up here, where these two intersect, falls down into the 68% island. And remember I said 70 and up is good. 68's not real bad, but it's definitely not ideal. So this turbo in this setup will generate a little heat. Trying to stay, if I try to run it at this area right here. Lastly, we can take the CFM figure we came up with, 444, and we can turn it into pounds per minute to see our potential horsepower at the flywheel. So 444 divided by 14.27 will equal 31.1. And if you recall in lesson 1, we can take 31.1 and multiply it by 10 to get our potential crank horsepower for our given motor. So 31.1 times 10 equals 310. So now we know that we should be able to reach a ballpark figure of 310 flywheel horsepower with this turbo and the values that we entered for our given motor on that calculator. Different factors like motor's health, modifications, restrictions, other things not taken into consideration with the calculator and the math will also affect or either hurt or help you. But this is a very good ballpark. Volumetric efficiency, 90 is a good conservative ballpark number, but your motor might be higher or lower. In my case, I use 90. So this is a good, simple, basic guide on how to use compressor maps to try to determine around how quickly a turbo can spool and its potential power. Obviously, things like how efficient your intercooler is, the piping, your exhaust system, your tuner. There's all kinds of other things that will come into factor here. But I just want to give you guys an idea. When I did this map, and I went and built the car and put the turbo on the car, I took it to Evans Tuning. And Jeff Evans is a very good tuner, and he gets, he's well known for being able to do good safe tunes and get the power out of the car. And the car made, when I first went, 295, I think it was, 290 something wheel horsepower at this level, at 20 pounds. And as you know, crank horsepower is always a little more than wheel horsepower. So that's about right. 290 wheel, 310 crank. That was a really good ballpark. I then later had the turbo modified slightly with a slightly larger compressor wheel called a 20G wheel. And went back and it made 305 wheel horsepower at the same boost level. And we figured that at that point it should have won a little higher in horsepower, but at that point it was my small intercooler holding me back. So the compressor map definitely got me in the right ballpark. I was right on. The turbo spooled real fast. There's videos on my YouTube channel. If you go to one of my oldest videos, it'll show my CRX. I think the video is called something like 0 to 155 or 0 to 150 or something like that. Anyway, you see, it's a video where you ride along inside the CRX, and you can see the boost gauge very clearly. You can see me do several dig launches where I start from a stop and go from 0 boost to 20 pounds of boost. And watch the tack, and you'll see that it was the compressor map didn't lie. It definitely taught me and helped me pick out the turbo I wanted for 300 horsepower, because that was my goal at the time. I hope this will help lift a lot of the mysteries about picking a turbo for you. It's very simple. There's no real voodoo here. I know I probably talked a little fast and confused people a little bit, but if you just go to the websites and read my tutorial and do it yourself once or twice, and do a little reading on the Garrett website, it's going to become very clear as a bell for you on how to pick your turbo out. Also, some maps don't offer CFM or pounds per minute at the bottom, across the bottom. They'll use something called cubic meters per second, or M3/S. I did a little bit of conversion for you guys on the websites there for to typically convert some of the M3/S to CFM, and there's a little chart there. So you can use that too if the compressor map you happen to dig up for the turbo you're interested in has that. I would basically, if you're interested in a turbo, contact the manufacturer and ask them for a compressor map. Look on Google and search for one. If you can't find one for yours, find one that's pretty close to it, and then just plot it out like this for fun. And it'll definitely help get you into the ballpark of where you want to be. So that's about it. I'm going to wrap this up. I can't think of anything else to add, except for I'd like to show you guys that calculator real quick. And let me see here. This is actually on dseries.org where they stickied me a while back. Let's see here. I can't find it here. I know there's a link for the calculator. I probably should have done my homework ahead of time for you guys. Okay. There's a calculator here for converting your own cubic meter per second to CFM, but obviously this website is not letting us use the other calculator. So let's go to the other one, which will be basically you can just Google compressor map reading for dummies. Take off the dseries.org part here, and that's going to take us right to Honda Swap Sticky. And under this website here, I'm pretty dang sure that the calculator has a link right here. Yeah, I don't know why it didn't show up on there, but this is the calculator I was telling you guys about that I used. So you put in the information it wants to know per the article, and you can plot your own compressor map. Okay, so that's where we stand, guys. If you have any questions or you guys want to discuss it, feel free to post down in the comments. I would like that if you shared this video with everybody you can, because the more people that understand this, the less people we have out there blowing up engines and making mistakes and making, lots of expensive errors that cost them down the road. So feel free to share this video with everybody in any website or forum that you go on, and let's see if we can get help everybody be able to properly match up a turbo for their setup and make some good power. So that's it. I'll figure out how to shut this thing here off quick, and then I'll see you guys on YouTube.